All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are tackling two of the absolute biggest ideas in all of science, heredity and evolution. We're going to explore how traits get passed down from one generation to the next, and how that simple process, playing out over millions and millions of years, has shaped every single living thing on Earth. So let's get started.
It's a question we've all asked ourselves at some point. How is it that you can be this perfect mix of your parents, but at the same time be totally, completely unique? Well, it's not magic. It's the beautiful, kind of mind-blowing science of heredity.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the ancient puzzle of inheritance, then see how a monk in a garden managed to crack the code. After that, we'll get into the molecule of life itself, DNA. Then, we're going to zoom way out to Darwin's incredible theory of evolution, and finally, we'll bring it all home to our very own human story.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. You have to understand, for most of human history, how traits were actually passed on, well, it was one of the biggest mysteries in the natural world.
Just think about it. For thousands of years, people knew this stuff worked. Farmers knew they could breed better livestock, and anyone could see that kids look like their parents. But the how? That was a total black box. No one had a clue. Until the mid-1800s, that is.
And this is where our story gets its first hero, a guy named Mendel. Now, he wasn't working in some fancy high-tech university lab. Nope. He was a monk, just quietly and carefully working in his monastery garden, and he was about to change the course of biology forever.
You see, Mendel's genius was really in his method, and his choice to use the humble pea plant, absolutely brilliant. Why? Well, they had super clear, distinct traits, tall or short, with nothing in between. They could pollinate themselves, which is handy, but he could also step in and control their breeding. And the best part? They grew fast, so he could get results in just one season.
So, let me walk you through his classic experiment. First, he took a plant that was pure breeding tall and another that was pure breeding dwarf, and he crossed them. Simple enough. He called their offspring the F1 generation. Then, he took those plants and let them pollinate themselves. The big question was, what would that next generation, the F2, look like?
And the results were, honestly, they were stunning. In that first generation, every single plant was tall. It was like the dwarf trait had just vanished. But then, and this is the amazing part, in the second generation, bam, it came back. And here's the kicker. It always came back in this perfectly predictable ratio. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 dwarf plant. A perfect 3-to-1 ratio. This revealed a hidden rule. Some traits, like being tall, were dominant, while others were recessive.
Now, Mendel called these little units of inheritance factors. Today, we have a different name for them, alleles. They're just different versions of a single gene. You get one from each parent. So a plant could have 1 tall allele and 1 dwarf allele, but it would still be tall, because that tall allele is dominant. It completely masks the effect of the recessive one.
So Mendel's work was totally revolutionary, right? But it left this one giant question hanging in the air. What were these factors? What was the actual physical molecule that carried all of life's instructions? It's a great question, and it would take almost 100 years to find the answer. And here it is. The answer was DNA. By the 1950s, the race was on to figure out its structure. It was Rosalind Franklin's absolutely incredible X-ray images that provided the final crucial clue. That's what allowed James Watson and Francis Crick to build their now famous double helix model in 1953. And in doing so, they unlocked the very code of life.
This amazing code, DNA, is all neatly packaged into things called chromosomes. We humans have 23 pairs of them, and it's that 23rd pair that determines biological sex. It's pretty straightforward. Females have 2 X chromosomes, which means all of their eggs carry an X. Males, on the other hand, have 1 X and 1 Y, so their sperm can carry either an X or a Y. And what that means is, it's the sperm from the father that actually determines the sex of the baby.
Okay, so now we get how traits are passed down to individuals. But let's zoom out, like way out. How do entire populations, even whole species, change over these vast stretches of time? Well, for that, we need to turn to our second hero, the one and only Charles Darwin.
To really get Darwin's big idea, let's just use a simple story. Picture this. You've got a population of red beetles, and they're all living on some green bushes. Now, for the hungry crows flying overhead, these red beetles on a green background, they stick out like a sore thumb. They're an easy meal.
But then, one day, just by random chance, a tiny little hiccup in the DNA, a green beetle is born. And all of a sudden, this one little guy has a huge advantage. It's camouflaged. The crows just fly right on by because they can't even see it against the green leaves.
And that, right there, is natural selection in a nutshell. The green beetle survives long enough to reproduce, and it passes on its genes for being green. Over many, many generations, what do you think happens? The whole beetle population starts to become mostly green. The environment itself, in this case the green leaves and those hungry crows, selected for the trait that gave them the best shot at survival.
And we can see the evidence for evolution written all over the anatomy of living things. For example, take homologous organs. The bones in your arm and the bones in a whale's flipper, they look really different on the outside, and they do totally different jobs, right? But their basic underlying structure is almost identical. That's a huge clue that we share a common ancestor. Now, that's different from what we call analogous organs, like the wing of a bat and the wing of a butterfly. Yeah, they both do the same job, flying, but they evolved in completely different ways, totally independently.
So, what does this epic story of evolution mean for us? Where do we, as humans, fit into this picture? Well, this final part of our journey brings it all right back home, to the story of Homo sapiens.
Look, the genetic evidence on this is just overwhelming. Every single modern human is part of one species, and our shared story begins in Africa. We can literally trace our genetic footprints back to African roots. And what this means, scientifically, is that the concept of different biological races, it's just not a real thing. It's a social idea, not a scientific one. We are, quite literally, one big family.
And wow, what a journey it has been. This timeline here just shows a few of the major milestones in our ancient family tree. You've got Homo habilis, the handyman, who first started using tools. Then Homo erectus, the first to walk fully upright. And eventually you get to us, Homo sapiens, modern humans, who are actually pretty recent arrivals on the scene.
Our own bodies are like living records of this incredible history. It's like we're walking museums, carrying around these things called vestigial organs, basically parts that have lost their original function. I'm talking about your appendix, your tailbone, even those tiny muscles that let some people wiggle their ears. They're all just little echoes of our deep, deep evolutionary past.
I mean, when you really stop and think about it, the journey is just incredible. From a single cell all the way to a species that can think and wonder about its own origins, that whole story is written in our very genes, connecting every living thing on this planet into one vast, beautiful family tree.
So now that you know the theory, I want you to look around. The next time you see someone breeding dogs for a specific look, or you notice how the birds or insects in your neighborhood are perfectly suited to their environment, you're literally watching heredity and evolution at work. This stuff isn't just in a textbook. It's happening all around us all the time. So the question is, what examples will you spot?